palette. We're going to be like doing things very hands-on. So this session really is like a great kind of introduction to actually getting your hands. We're live? Are we live now? Okay. And we're live. Welcome to Substrate Seminar. This is particularly exciting. Usually I say exactly what I just said, but I'm in a home office, just streaming and interviewing or talking to a single dev or builder in the Substrate ecosystem. But here today, we decided to do like a special Substrate Seminar because we're at ETH Denver, and we have all these parachain teams with us. And so super excited to be here. We have a live audience. We also have people streaming in today. So as usual for Substrate Seminars, usually for those of you who don't know, we bring in builders building with Substrate, and it's always meant to be very sort of like, a homey feel, like it's comfortable, right? We're okay with asking questions. I encourage people to interrupt us, so I really want to preserve that even in this setting. So those of you in the audience, please just jump right up. Like I can see Jake will have a question within the first 5 minutes, and I really want him to stand up and ask the question. So please don't hold back. And those of you who are streaming live, use the question box. We have people here that will be keeping an eye on it, so ask your questions there. So for this seminar, I wanted to kind of, ask general questions, right? So I'm kind of just like setting like the rules like for this session here. There's going to be like general questions. So, maybe one of you like wants to answer immediately, so maybe just put your hand up and then answer, and we can pass the mic. And sometimes it'll be more directed, right? So we'll kind of like play along with it, like see how it goes. So my name is Sasha Lansky. I am a developer advocate at Parity Technologies. And when I'm not doing like this kind of stuff, I'm writing documentation for Substrate. So I really enjoy kind of doing both of them. Right now, Substrate is also growing really fast, so a lot of technical writing is required, and that's what I do. So before kind of introducing panelists and stuff, just a little more housekeeping. There's going to be like 3 parts to this panel, right? So I really like to encourage you guys to like ask questions. We're going to go through kind of each part and then ask questions. I want you guys to ask your questions and then kind of proceed that way. So today I have the honor to have all these teams. So we'll start with Joshua. So Joshua, you want to tell us like what do you do and who do you work for?
My name is Joshua, and I work for Manta Network. I'm their developer advocate, but I also work on some of their palette integrations as a REST app. And yeah, that's my small introduction.
Cool. Yeah, why don't we go around to all the panelists? Next.
Hi everybody, I'm Brandon. I work for the Centrifuge project as a Substrate developer, working on the Centrifuge and Altair chains, porting our legacy Ethereum Solidity code to resident Substrate.
Cool.
All right, thank you. Yeah, this is Shubo. I'm a technical co-founder of Manta Network. Mostly doing like a zero-knowledge proof cryptography and also like writing like low-level Substrate code.
Hey everybody, good morning. This is Yubo from Parallel Finance, founder of Parallel Finance. Well, I am not a developer right now, but I was a developer before. And the way we started the company was we went to Parity's hackathon, and then so we met all of the team members, and then we built the first version. All coded, and then started the company later on. But yeah, so we're building a lot of DeFi applications for DApp holders and basically Kusama holders and all the Polkadot ecosystem users. and which I'm going to give more introduction later on. But thanks.
Well, hello everyone. My name is Hoon. I'm the CTO of Stake Technologies, the company behind Star Network and Sheet Network. And yes, although I'm a full stack developer, I'd say I'm more comfortable when it comes to the front-end development side of Substrate. So probably I'll be able to answer a lot of questions related to that area. Thanks.
Hi everyone, I'm Greg. I'm one of the core Rust engineers on the interBTC protocol. I've been with the company Interlay for around 2 years now, going from the prototyping phase all the way to now. We've launched Kintsugi and the Interlay networks. And I'm excited to kind of chat with you guys today and get your perspective on how the ecosystems work together.
Awesome, super cool. So the question I really wanted to ask to kick things off is, who are you building for, right? So like you guys as developers, like I'm curious, like who wants to go first to answer the question of, when you're spending a day like, in your code editor, like who are you building for?
I guess I think I have a good answer for that. So we're building on Interlay for the degens, the maxis of BTC that just want to hold and earn on their Bitcoin. And our true vision is to just decentralize Bitcoin bridges. Like we see the open market with WBTC and the centralized point of failure, and we really want to just enable the true vision of Satoshi in an open marketplace. And we're starting here with Polkadot because it has some of the best tech, and we're super excited to bring that to life.
Maybe I can go next. We're building for probably dot maxi. So whoever had a lot of dot and Kusama tokens that they wanted to borrow and then they wanted to earn yield, or they wanted to get a credit line, or they wanted to trade. So all of that can achieve through the platform. So we're directly building application toward this end consumers or end users. In the future, potentially we can open up for more developers to build on top, but that would be a pretty long-term idea.
Okay, so for the Star Network, one of the main features of the Star Network is dApp staking, which allows you to stake to a smart contract or a dApp that's deployed on our network. And I'd say the question of who are we making for? And the short answer is we're making for developers. And I guess the long answer would be we want to make a platform where that incentivizes people who are really utilizing the true power of Web 3.0, and we want to enable developers to be incentivized for their work and also show the other networks who is really bringing the value for your network. It's not just the traders, it's not just the whales, it's not just the token holders, but people who actually create usable applications, and that's sort of our vision.
Oh, thanks. Oh, I think this is a very philosophical question, like who are you building for? I will give a direct answer. I think the first priority is the dot Sama token holders. We are a on-chain privacy project, and basically we are doing the bring your own token model so that every parachain asset and relay chain asset could be privatized using our ZK Snark technology, right? So basically we are like a privacy provider to give you the fundamental privacy layer of Web3. And to the second approximation, we're also building for developers because we are building a programmable smart contract platform for private assets. So that will going to be open to like even more broader developers. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, do you want to say something?
Yeah. So at Centrifuge, I guess, contrasting a lot of these, we're focused on real-world assets and especially driving down the cost of borrowing money for businesses that might have challenges with that in traditional finance. And in order to do that, the fees on Ethereum are just too high to actually drive down the costs in the way we want to. So Substrate gives us an opportunity to build that product in a way that can actually help us achieve our goals there.
And I'll do like one last thing. Like everybody else, we're building for the developer. We're doing confidential cloud computation. So with today's traditional smart contracts, how limited they are, we want to extend that capability with fat contracts so that any developer can really build whatever they want. So we can really bridge that Web 2 and Web 3 together.
Awesome. Cool. So you guys are all developers. And you're all building cool, meaningful things in the Web3 space. Why did you choose Substrate? Like, what is it about Substrate that makes it an attractive tech stack for what you're doing? Does anyone want to go first? Yeah,
I'll go
go.
first.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, I'm pretty new to Substrate. I started back in May, actually, and what really interested me was I had just read Mastering Ethereum and just saw there was a person named Dr. Gavin Wood, and I was like, what is he doing? What could he be doing? And I saw that he had created Polkadot and Kusama, and then they had a Substrate Academy, and that's what really got me, my mind like never stopping with ideas constantly, because it's just all the modularity with it.
Yeah. So, so I'm curious in hearing maybe from more of you. Like, you could have chosen any other framework. What was it about Substrate? And I think that maybe a lot of you maybe were already brought into a role where that was already the case. I think that's your case, Brennan, for example. Brennan, you were Rust dev working in IT before, right? Which is kind of cool. We'll get there after. But yeah, go ahead. Sure.
All right. So why did we choose Substrate over anything? Or I guess why did I choose Substrate over any other framework? I guess when it comes to developing blockchains, there are I guess two major options you can take. One is to develop a smart contract, and that has specific applications. Another option is to use a established framework or fork an existing chain. That's why there's so many derivatives of Ethereum out there. And also Hyperledger, I would say that's also sort of a blockchain framework in a sense. I mean, it is a blockchain framework. And with Substrate, one of the great things about Substrate is that it's very generic, it's very modular, and it's very expandable. And yeah, forkless runtime upgrades are absolutely brilliant. I love it so much. The more I learn about how Substrate works, and the more I learn about how other networks can use this and how we can collaborate with each other. I guess that was one of the major reasons why I chose to use Substrate. It's something that you can't really do with other blockchains where it's hard to connect. You have to create a bridge. But with Substrate, especially one of the promising factors of the Polkadot network, the relay chain, is that if you have parachain, you're able to send messages with each other via XCM.
Does anyone else want to answer that question?
Yeah, go ahead. Oh, thanks. Yeah, I think when we start building, it's mid 2020. So we are pretty clear what we're going to do, right? Basically doing a privacy layer for the Web3. So I think this is basically a technical decision plus an arcane decision. So first, from the technical side, basically we need the following things. First, we need a fast runtime for zero-knowledge proof verifier, right? Which Substrate is very fast using the awesome WebAssembly technology. And secondly, we cannot be a smart contract. So I guess in the spirit of interacting, how many of you folks heard of the UTXO model?
UTXO.
Yeah, UTXO Bitcoin, right?
Heard about it?
Yeah. So great.
Why don't you tell us what the UTXO
so
model
the
is?
essential difference is that, let's say in the blockchain like Ethereum, right? So it's account based. So basically you have a decentralized ledger actually maintains account and associated balance, kind of like a public verifiable on-chain. And things like Bitcoin or Zcash. So I mean, you are literally minting a new coin single time you do a transfer, and you just transfer from an old coin to a new coin. So because we want to build a privacy project, it's impossible to utilizing a UTXO model, right? Which basically a smart contract approach is out of box. And so this is it's really of course, last but not least, the XCM gives us power to interact with other kind of parachain asset.
Yeah,
right.
Before going too deep where we're already talking about some cool technical features about Substrate, I want to talk about that later for sure. But before we kind of go there, I wanted to remain sort of a little high level, right? So what is Substrate? Why are you using Substrate? And the next kind of question I wanted to touch on is, what are the barriers of entry, right, for developers? You guys are all hiring devs, right? What is your experience in? Okay, what do you need to know? Maybe you're a developer from the Web 2 world. Maybe some basic JavaScript, and all of a sudden you need to learn Rust. Like, how does that work, and what would you recommend?
Well, that's... I guess we're answering.
It seems like you have some thoughts.
Well, yes. Yeah, I guess it's when I remember, like, think back at when I first started Substrate, which was it was like mid-2019, which was like before alpha stage, which means there was no documentations. I literally had to go through the source code of Substrate to understand what's going on here. And at the time, I barely knew how Rust works, like let alone macros. So barrier entry was extremely high. I can understand why no one is really using this. Even now, fortunately now, we have so many resources online. Great documentation, Substrate is .dev, the documentation is great. We also have a dedicated Stack Exchange to communicate with, discussing about Substrate stuff. And the community is very big. It is absolutely huge. I believe, yes, for barrier of entry, if it really depends on what the developer did previously. Does the developer know how blockchain works? Is the developer did the developer create a smart contract project before? Or does the developer only know how to use Rust but has no idea about what blockchain is? And depending on those factors, I'd say it really depends on like which approach you can go into. If you know how smart contracts work, then you already know most of the main features, or I guess the core principles of how a palette works. You have the basics of functions, you have storage, you have events. So those are quite clear, but if you've never really touched those architecture before, then it's going to be a little bit difficult. But that's why there's a lot of programs, like was it the Substrate Builders program? It's also one. There's also the Substrate Academy, I believe that's the name. It's where you can introduce new developers to, or that introduces developers to the world of Substrate. So yeah, there's a lot. The barrier of entry is quite high, but fortunately there's a lot of resources nowadays. So I would definitely encourage people to go into it if you're interested in it.
Yeah, it sounds like you have something to say.
Well, just to add on, I think this is a great answer. So I think that we can share a little bit, because the way that we started the company, Parallel Finance, is literally going to a hackathon event that we program and then build the demos at the beginning. And I think that this is a perfect way to get developers and then people that are interested to actually get together, build a team, learn from each other, building this sort of in-person or online community that they can learn from each other, that they can solve challenges all together, and then potentially they can build some useful products that the, Parity Web3 Foundation can feedbacks and then the people can use. So I think those kind of events will be extremely helpful to lower the entry barrier. I know that Solana is doing a lot of hacker house around different places. It's more in person, and then people literally stay together and build stuff. I think those are interesting way to lower the barrier. But fundamentally, I think Substrate is a new way of building a blockchain-based application. So instead of writing a smart contracts, which I think is easier, relatively easier. Solidity is similar to JavaScript, and then you can understand that you just need to focus on the business logic, application logic. But if you wanted to build a substrate-based framework, right, you have to really understand how the blockchain works, at least from a high level. What is the consensus layer? What is the P2P network communication layer? What is the runtime logic? What does it mean? And then what are some high-level applications you actually wanted to build? And so those are all of the more technical side that I think at least some basic levels of understanding of blockchain is required. So then maybe even before people learn Substrate, right, tell them how blockchain works and how Bitcoin, how Ethereum, and how all of those previous blockchain works. And then they understand, okay, this is a new type of paradigm of building an application where you have sort of three advantages, right? One, you have the modular blockchain approach, which is most of the blockchain going to go in a lot more customizability. Second of all, you have a great interoperability. And number three, there's a perfect developer community. In fact, the Polkadot developer community is number 2 in the whole world right now. So those are all the benefits that we should let the developer know that, hey, this is great. Let's build something that is going to solve a lot of problems, and then things, especially things that smart contract couldn't do.
Yeah, so I actually just want to jump back to your previous question quickly and say why I kind of wanted to work with Substrate, and that's Rust. Maybe Brendan can relate. Rust is a brilliant language, and Substrate is unparalleled. So You could work with Cosmos, you work with Go, Go's a lovely language, but like really for Rust, you need to work with Substrate, and it's just a brilliant framework for that. So my joke answer to barrier to entry there, I guess, would be a good computer, because Rust is like, RCI pipelines take hours.
Yeah, that's true.
But the language is just so nice, and it makes it so hard to do something wrong and bring in a lot of the kind of traditional software vulnerabilities we've seen in the past. So I think the real answer there to barrier to entry, especially into the Substrate kind of ecosystem, is like learning Rust, how to kind of optimize it. That's one of the biggest things with Substrate is like what I found difficult sometimes to comprehend is like benchmarking and thinking about complexity. And you have to do this in like a super fine, like detailed level. We have it to a certain extent in Ethereum with like the gas model and making sure that your smart contracts run cheaper. But Rust and indeed Substrate bring it to a whole new level. But I think we're doing a really good job with like improving that and documentation in the ecosystem. Like it just grows and grows each day as more people join and work. So I'm super excited to see like the progress there.
Yeah, I think, for me, as coming in as a Rust developer before this, a lot of Substrate was pretty easy to pick up, and I think, learning Rust can be the big barrier, but definitely the fact that you're building a blockchain is inescapable, and you have to understand those technologies. I remember pretty early on when I started this, I had spun up a test instance of our chain and let my laptop go to sleep without realizing it, and Aura consensus falls over if it doesn't produce blocks for so long. So I came back and my chain was halted, and I had no idea what my bug was. And those are hard concepts to understand, right?
Yeah, a lot of layers of complexity, and as a developer, you need to be constantly aware of it, and you can't just you don't have just the luxury of just building an application with a smart contract where everything else is kind of dealt with before. So for me, this is kind of like this first part. So I want to kind of close here and ask the audience if there's any questions, or is there any questions in the crowdcast? Urban, you have a question? Yeah, here.
Thank you very much. So, for anybody who doesn't know, I'm Urban from the Web3 Foundation, and I work actually alongside Sasha in much of the developer relations stuff. And a lot of our discussions touch on education, right? So a lot of you kind of touched on this, but I really want to dig a little bit deeper. Because for us, some of these questions that you in part actually answered, and I think you guys came in via hackathon, right? What are some of the topics that you think should be better covered, right? Because one is, Rust, and that you've got Rust book, you've got Rust courses, you've got a lot of stuff to kind of onboard that. You look at Ethereum, and there's a bunch of stuff for Solidity and how to do smart contracts, literally copy-paste smart contracts, right? There's a bunch of stuff that's built. Then you look at Substrate, and we've got wonderful documentation thanks to people like Sasha who are non-stop working on this. But I feel like going from zero to having a somewhat sensible blockchain, right, that actually makes sense, not just spinning up something, is a different kind of beast. So in your guys' opinion, what do you think is kind of missing out there to help other people spin up blockchains and create their own blockchains that actually make sense, right? I'm not talking about a node template or something like that. I'm talking about what kind of knowledge do you think we as Parity Web3 should be providing in order to make that jump a little bit easier? That could range from, I don't know, economics to game theory to better understanding, better explaining consensus mechanisms, whatever that might be. But I'm really curious what were kind of the things that you guys would point out.
So for me, actually being a recent graduate of the, I guess graduate, but I completed the Substrate Runtime Academy, and I thought the most valuable part of that was, one, having a weekly tech talk with one of the more experienced devs that was able to take in some questions and then find exactly what devs we're looking for. So whenever you're looking for answers, it's hard. You can get frustrated and kind of give up if you don't want to wait too long or say you had something, had an error and you compiled it, it just takes a long time to rebuild and test, and some people might not know how to test either. So just having more guidance from more experienced developers and have them more available. I know it's hard, but this is something that I think for the developers that are just onboarding, they need more of that support and have open areas where they know exactly where to go to get that advice.
Actually, I've got an extremely relevant point for that. So one of our problems is we have a lot of experienced developers, but sometimes, as Brendan mentioned, like the chain falls over, and there's a lot of components in Substrate, a lot of complexity. You're looking at Aura and Babe and Grandpa, and sometimes it's just really hard to narrow down what exactly went wrong and in your runtime. Now it's awesome that we have loads of experience from Parity and Web3 who can jump in and help debug these issues. But at the end of the day, it can be a bit of a bottleneck to always rely on Parity and Web3 to help you fix those issues. So I guess something I'd like to see more is kind of a decentralized of that knowledge, I guess. Like, I don't know how to do it exactly. I guess, yeah, Stack Exchange is a good point, because good starting point, because that's, I think, is that released?
Yeah,
published
it's
yet?
out,
That's
yeah,
out.
yeah.
Awesome. Yeah.
As of like last week.
Yes, good Stack Exchange. Hopefully that'll solve your problems.
Right. So in terms of which part of the tutorial we should add more, I would say my comment about the current status of Substrate documentation in all the tutorials is that it's way too specific and way too tech focused. Which, I mean, that is fine. It's, that's the core audience. But if we're coming from, let's say, as a perspective of a businessman, like who's trying to adapt this blockchain technology to your corporations, like why would I use Substrate? And it doesn't really justify that. It only tells you the very specific parts. And even if you're adapting Substrate and you want to onboard new developers, one of the things I really feel like would help a lot if there was documentation for it would be to have industry best practices. For example, like should you use a separate store just purely for exporting it to the UI, since the UI has to read certain chain data, but trying to parse every block is just too much, so having like a store would be fine. But in reality, if you keep a store, then every time you actually change the data structure, you have to also do like a storage migration, which is also a pain in the ass, and it just adds more bloat to the chain. So that's not really considered as best practice. And the best practice is to just emit those, I guess, those instances as an event, as part of the block. And I wish like there was documentation to sort of tell you that. And it's not just Substrate, but I think like any blockchain documentation or just development ecosystem, there isn't a established best practice or industry standards at the moment. And I feel like this should be a pivotal moment to sort of establish that.
Yeah, I think all you guys have mentioned a great point. I think I just want to first say, right? So I mean, just try to debunk the kind of hard part a little bit, right? I mean, when you're talking about hard, when you're talking about entry barrier, when you're talking about complexity, I mean, there are two kinds of complexity. The first complexity, I call it inherent complexity. Because we're building on Substrate, we're building layer 1, right, essentially. It's going to be harder than smart contract, not going to lie, right? I think the second part is where we can improve on, basically get a better documentation, better education, and connectively build a better logic base, right? I think, actually, I won't say like all the Web3 and Parity folks, you guys are doing a great job right so far. I think I just put myself in the position, try to build all this like huge developer community and help documentation. I just cannot do that, right? I think you guys do a wonderful job. That's the first one to say. And in terms of like the improvement, I think I really agree you just said, right? So basically, I think my particular complaint is about security best practices, because blockchain is like security like critical software, right? So there is and I think it's actually a strength of Substrate because it's so flexible, so that you can do various different things. It's very expressive, which also gives you more danger in the sense that you can mess up things with so many different ways. I think, just my personal opinion, a little bit guidance on best practice and how do you kind of bring this kind of like a security mentality would be super helpful. Yeah.
that's actually the same, pretty much the same thing. But maybe add on top of that is the maybe from a business perspective, because we're thinking about attracting new developers, we're attracting new, I guess, like startups to use this technology. I think one of the most important message that probably these documentation should convey is that why Substrate? Why is it better than other technology when it comes to my use case that I wanted to build? I remember looking at for example, Ethereum's like documentation on their website. They actually mentioned a bunch of like sort of use cases from like identity to DeFi to also what have you, right? Exactly on their website. So I think that maybe it's going to be helpful just to mention that hey, Substrate can enable a heterogeneous network of blockchain. Then you can actually build a supply chain on top. You can build an identity chain on top, storage chain on top, and then how exactly those chains could work. That is different than using a smart contract. And what are the benefits of using Substrate versus them? So that at least from a non-technical backgrounds, founders or enterprise, right, that they are considering what technology to build on, they can look at them and say, hey, that actually makes sense. Let me go deeper. Versus telling them exactly every single details of how the tech work without giving them this high-level understanding of what exactly is the benefits, right? The high-level advantage that incentivize them to go deeper. And then when you're talking about bigger enterprise, it's important to have sort of network effect where the more developer use Substrate, the higher values because of the interoperability. And now, like a lot of the enterprise are looking toward to build some chains, right? I think Substrate can have a perfect opportunity. And now I think the enterprise education is important as well. PayPal is trying to launch their stablecoin. They're considering Substrate as one of their tools. That's perfect. But at the same time, there are Fortune 500 companies, right? There are thousands of companies out there that they wanted to know about it. They have zero knowledge about, like zero idea. That's your knowledge. Zero idea about even just Ethereum. Right? Think about this. If you don't understand Ethereum, how can you expect them to exactly understand, like frame, pallets, substrate, like runtime upgrades, and then like benchmarking? This is complicated.
Yeah. One last question from the audience before we kind of move on to the next chunk. No? Cool.
I'm like,
Oh, we have a question from Crowdcast.
Is he saying UTXO model is not compatible with smart contracts? Is he saying UTXO model is not compatible with smart contracts?
All right, that's a very good question. So the short answer is not right now, but the no answer is we actually have a cool idea to consolidate UTXO with smart contract. Come to Manta Talk tomorrow.
Great answer. Any other questions from Crowdcast?
Yeah, I think another one from Graphics is how can devs from Substrate-based projects more easily contribute back upstream? Having to fork these projects just to change versions or small details is pretty common. So they're wondering basically what's the best way to contribute back?
Well, so I can talk from like Parity text, like GitHub repos of tech, right? Like so we got like the Cumulus repo, we've got the Polkadot repo, we've got the Substrate repo. The Substrate repo kind of powers all like the other two. So how to give back? Like just do a PR, like find a bug, like just put up an issue. Maybe there's a feature that you want, and do it directly on Parity text GitHub's org. Now, with all these teams here, like maybe they have their own answer, which is like like do the same for like Interlay's GitHub. I don't know. Like yeah, do you have any? Yeah, you want to add to that, Greg?
Yeah. Open an issue. We don't bite. Like I'm super keen for people to take work off my plate, so I don't have as much to do. So open an issue, or I can find people issues if they really want to get stuck in. Just reach out to us. Like
Same.
Yeah.
Awesome. I have one last question for you guys. I know we talked a little bit earlier about like learning and using Substrate as maybe a method to learn about like blockchain and distributed systems consensus. So I wonder, in your guys' view, like what was most impactful in understanding like how Frame is constructed, how Substrate is constructed, in helping you better understand blockchains in general?
I think I can talk a little bit, just start the conversation. I think when I first programming Substrate, right, it's really magic because my prior experience that I actually trying to build blockchain from scratch. When I first see Substrate, hey, this is amazing, right? I think a lot of powerful things of the Substrate are kind of hidden in the Rust macros, right? So this is a really Substrate is a combination of the Rust code and the Rust macros. And there's a lot of things, sorry, please. A lot of things sounds magic because you can, in day one, you can launch your prototype, is good. But at the same time, the macro kind of hidden a lot of details, right? So if you are not able to kind of dive super deep into the macro world of the Rust, sometimes you are get lost because sounds too good to be true and it's kind of magic. You don't know how to kind of understand the things, right? So this is something, something interesting.
So let's just dive right into the second part, which is this is what I want to talk about. So Rust. Let's talk about Rust, right? I mean, in the beginning, you can start your node template and you're building and you're coding in Substrate and it's Rust and you don't know Rust, but it works. But there's very fast you will need to know basic Rust. So I want to hear from you guys, and I think Brandon might be a good first candidate for this answer, which is what is it what about Rust do you need to know as a developer? And really, how does it make it powerful for Substrate, actually? Generics and things like that.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that is unavoidable in Substrate is Rust generics, like you just mentioned. They're everywhere. The runtime is really secretly one big monolithic generic that's glued together with these macros. And that's really powerful because when you do it that way, it lets the Rust optimizer just zip through all of your code and make the runtime as small as fast as possible. But it does make the code a little more boilerplatey and a little bit harder to read sometimes. The other thing that you're going to have to learn pretty quickly is Rust's error handling. It's very explicit. It can also be a little boilerplatey if you're not used to it. It's very powerful. It's very good at enforcing correctness because the compiler will yell at you if you don't handle an error correctly. But it's...
Well, can you tell us a little bit more about macros? I think the concept of meta programming isn't very common to many languages. So maybe for the audience, can we just talk about what a macro is and how it's being used to build frame palettes?
Yeah, so in Rust, I guess I'm going to talk about the new style procedural macros because that's most of what Substrate uses now. Macros are essentially another program that takes a structural representation of some Rust code and can emit other Rust code based off of that the compiler will then use inline. You see these everywhere in Substrate. Your weight annotations are a macro, and that emits some additional data that's used in the palette. I actually haven't looked at that macro. I don't know how it works. There's macros for gluing together the runtime, your final runtime block that's these are all my palettes. I want to bring in their calls, their errors, their events. That's a macro that creates these top-level structures based off of the data from all your palettes. So they are ubiquitous, and when they work well, they hide a ton of complexity that you'd have to write by hand. Every once in a while, you have to dive into them.
Yeah. So to answer that, there's also one really good macro we use everywhere, the transaction macro. I think there's a GitHub issue to make it default on Substrate runtimes, but that's so cool because it basically takes away a lot of complexity from Substrate. Currently, with every storage write, you have to always do your check verification first and not do your writes last. But that's coming from Ethereum. That's an unfamiliar concept. You write your contract, and if it fails, then it shouldn't write to storage. So transactional to me is something that I agree with the GitHub issue. It should be enabled by default, but it takes away a ton of complexity from us. So we don't have to then rewrite a ton of our extrinsics in order to verify first, write last. And I think that's, quite powerful.
Cool, yeah, so my next question is like kind of, so we have a good mix of like more like product and high level of like, you know, because we're talking about these substrate blockchains. You've got low level palettes like really on the runtime, but then you've got how to interact with it. Like, so, you know, when you mentioned, you're kind of working more on like front end stuff, user interaction. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And then I want to hear from others here, like what palettes are you building and what are the things that you're building with Substrate and where do you live in that stack? So,
okay, so I guess depending on which layer of complex we're talking about, like this discussion could be quite long. But so in short, Substrate nodes, they dynamically emit the types of the chain. So what it means is that you can actually see what the chain properties are, what the type annotations are from the RPCs directly, and then we can generate the RPC payload, which you then send to the chain, and then that executes a transaction from the node side. So I guess the question of like how do you interact with it for all.
How does it compare to like Ethereum and like their metadata system?
Right. Yeah. So metadata system. Yeah, Ethereum metadata is very static, of course, because it's just Ethereum is already like I guess monolithic. It's complete, quote unquote complete. When you're trying to make, let's say, a client application that accesses Ethereum or EVM information, then you would use Web3.js library to access the chain data. For Substrate, there is a library called Polkadot.js API, which you can use. And it's because all the metadata are dynamic. It's really hard to say actually because functions themselves, you can just when you create a frame, for example, let's say I create a random like flipper frame for my node, then I could actually access that through the client through my JavaScript code by instantiating the API instance connected with my node, and then just go to API.tx and then the name of the frame itself, the function, which is absolutely like mind-breaking, really. Like when I first encountered that, and then the parameters, like they're all also like passed as just an array of like arguments.
Sorry, I feel like I've been doing a lot of talking, but yeah, well, I want to say I'm really happy with Metadata v14. Like I was waiting so long for that to come out, and I was super pumped when it was released. Yes, there were some issues with the deployment on Kusama, but super happy now that we have like a cool set of tech that we can like bring up clients, like JavaScript clients and Rust clients, purely from like that metadata blob. And this is in line with Ethereum. Like before I started working in like Substrate and Rust, I did Solidity, and with that there were some interesting tools where you could type gen like client code. So now like yeah, to basically do the comparison, I think we're now basically feature complete on that perspective, and that's yeah, SubXT, yeah, super exciting to see.
I think a similar experience here. So I had been working at pretty much like Solidity before, and then also built a full stack applications for Solidity. And so it was at TripFi, so we built a lot of governance contract, credit line contracts there. I was there, and then in terms of like the front end interactions, we use a lot of Ethos.js and also obviously Web3.js. And then the interesting thing is that they have a lot of tools on the Ethereum side. And then when we talking about getting access to historical state, right? We have to get access to maybe like Alchemy. They have some services you have to pay, or some other stuff. Polkadot.js, I think it's cool. It's really, really good. I think that at the beginning, I also interact with the Polkadot.js and get data, and then doing this intrinsics, and then getting this security from the blockchain to get data. The only thing that I think is interesting is that every time when the runtime upgrades, the metadata sometimes also updates. So I have to kind of update the front ends. Yeah. That's something that like we constantly have to build it. And then we also build a multi-signature sort of wallets, some small tools. And every time runtime upgrades, we have to rewrite the front ends. It's like, okay, it's a lot of work. So it'd be cool to have that automated.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about blockchains, not smart contracts, right? So yeah, when the runtime of the blockchain changes, the clients also need to adapt, and the front ends that are used to interacting in a certain way need to adapt to the change. Brandon, did you want to add something? You got the mic in your hand, you're kind of thinking, like, I can't tell, like...
Yeah, I think front end is my favorite topic, actually. I think Polkadot.js is great for developers, just like so flexible and powerful. But we're talking to our own like community users. It's not so great for people just getting to blockchain, right?
So I don't think that everyone in the audience is familiar with Polkadot.js. Do you want to just say real quick what Polkadot.js
so
is?
Polkadot.js, think of the MetaMask for Polkadot, right?
Right.
So basically, it has two forms. One is a website. You don't have to download anything. Just go to the website. You get a kind of like a web-based wallet, web app-based wallet. And the second is a browser extension. As if you are using like a Firefox or a Chrome, you have a browser extension, kind of similar to MetaMask. But I think here, my perspective is that maybe it's helpful to kind of break down into a developer tool and also a user-facing tool, because I think still has like a little bit more complexity, say with like a MetaMask or other kind of like a user-facing wallet. So that's basically my like perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Super. And what do you guys like? What do you guys have to say about scale and how important the scale codec system is in Substrate?
Scaling?
The scale encoding.
The scale encoding, yeah.
The scale encoding.
Yes.
Right? I think this is great. Yeah.
So can we talk about that just for a bit? Like, as developers, like how do you think that like adds like efficiency like that maybe other chains don't have? So as a developer advocate, like I often think we miss this really important piece when we're teaching how these blockchain systems really work.
Gotcha. By
missing out on talking about scale.
Yeah, just to the broader audience. So
yes.
Maybe I should first explain what is scale. Right? Basically, you think like the blockchain word is a very kind of like a digital word, right? So then everything is kind of like a binary, 0 and 1, 0 and 1. And scale is basically kind of like a serialization and deserialization layer. Let's say you take some data from the like outside of blockchain from the user interface, and the style codex basically defines like how do you. This is kind of like a canonical encoding format that Parity folks brings, so that you can encode whatever data, whatever type definition you want into the binary. It's kind of like a very cool serialization protocol. And what makes it cooler is that it's first it's very simple, which means the encoding and decoding time is fast. And secondly, it's very high performance, right? It tries to do.
Can you hold the mic closer to you?
Yeah, sorry. It's very yeah, my bad. It's very high performance in the sense that it did try to do compressing when it's possible, so that you have this compact binary representation on chain. As a result, I mean, basically compactness and compression in the blockchain world means saving gas fees, right? So then I think it's a really good design. And what makes it cooler is that for the style codex, that's what Brandon said before, a lot of magic are in the Rust macros, in the sense that when you define a type, right, you don't have to explicitly specify what is scale codex. I think it works like 99% of the time. You just need to add a kind of like a macro flag. It will automatically derive the scale encoding from that type definition.
If you come to our workshop after, you will learn exactly that.
Yeah. I mean, I only have good things to say about scale codec. Yeah.
No, thanks so much for describing it. For me, really, it was just an important kind of missing piece. We're talking about front ends. We're talking about these blockchains that really need to be efficient. Efficiency is key. We have limited resources, right? And we're building applications on them or that interact with them that need to be very efficient and that can't be sort of putting data in that the runtime won't be able to handle and things like this. So I wanted to that was something I just wanted to touch on and then move into like palettes. What's the palette that I want someone here to just raise their hand and say what's the palette they're most excited about that they're building?
One of the most exciting palettes actually that is working with a lot of collaboration between different projects.
You know what, can you describe what a palette is? Because maybe not everyone here knows.
A palette?
Yeah,
like gas
palette.
Okay. Let's see. So a palette will be, so let's see. So there's this generic palette that you can use to insert into your blockchain and add more functionality within it. I'm not going to be super technical here, but
It's a piece of logic in the runtime.
Yes, for the modularity part where you can really customize.
So
the
a
blockchain
palette is
model.
basically a way to write a module that you can compose your runtime with. Basically, so yeah. So the question is, what palettes are you guys writing that you're most excited about? I wasn't sure that the audience was familiar, so I had to.
Yeah, my apologies. The one that I'm most excited about, though, is the Remark palette. So at Fala, we're actually contributing to the Remark standard for the integration for the Remark NFT to be used for different blockchains. So whenever this palette is created and then put onto Substrate, any project will be able to use the Remark NFT. And just with all the power that NFTs and the NFT craze right now, every project that's on Ethereum, I feel, will be flocking over to the Polkadot ecosystem because there's so much power within that NFT 2.0 standard. And then as Bruno puts out the next iteration, it'll just be very powerful, and you can build these incredible worlds. So for instance, we're going to extend from that with our Fatal World palette and build our blockchain-based metaverse.
Yeah, go ahead.
So yeah, at the Star Network, I guess one of the major palettes that we're working on right now is dApp staking. And the dApp staking palette interface is actually based on the traditional staking palette, where you can stake for validators on Polkadot. In our case, we allow people to. We have like two parties involved here, where one, the developer of a smart contract, and the other one would be the normal stakers. And developers it's like sort of treated similar to how a validator is in a sense. Although developers are not really validating anything. Instead, they're being incentivized by the product or the smart contract that they developed. And yeah, although the interface is similar, the back end is completely different since when it comes to dApp staking, it's more about like how should we distribute the rewards and how are we going to like treat the eras and how are we going to handle the developer accounts, pre-approving developers. Are we going to go through like governance palettes to actually approve developers to register their dApps?
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I should say we're kind of at a feature freeze because we're kind of going live, getting audits, so we're not kind of working on any new kind of exciting palettes, but we have got some cool stuff like in the cache, I should say. So like one of our palettes, for instance, is called the Btc Relay, and that kind of encapsulates a Bitcoin light client, and that's what we use for verification of block heads and transactions on our chain. We have some other cool stuff. So more recently we implemented an escrow module. So we took basically the Curve governance model for stake to vote escrow tokens, and we implemented a port of that in Rust, and it was super easy. We just basically looked at the logic of the Viper contract, and we ported that directly to a Rust contract and plugged that into Polkadot governance, and we're going forward with that live in Kintsugi.
That's amazing.
So for us, we have a lot of palettes. We are building the whole sort of DeFi applications directly on palettes. So each DeFi protocol is a palette on our blockchain or on our Substrate chain. The next one that we are working on that will launch pretty soon on Kusama first, and then Polkadot will be the AMM palette. Actually, David here is also working on it on the audience. The AMM palettes that we have, the first version will be a standard constant product protocol, and any type of currency on our system can be used to trade or become an LP. The next version will be a stable swap. We're currently researching and then building and then improving on the curve. That is enabled for assets that have similar price volatilities that can be concentrated. The LP can concentrate their liquidity on. And then after that, we are going to launch 2 more palettes this quarter or next quarter. One is going to be the money markets. That enables any sort of asset to be borrowed and lent between each other. And then we are going to improve an efficiency model after the first version. And then so that we categorize each currency. And then inside of the categorizations, we have one type of collateral factor. And then outside, when cross-borrow, we enable bidirectional lateralization factors. And number 3 will be the liquid staking protocol. So users are able to stake their DOT or Kusama, earning the liquid staking sort of derivative, similar to Lido. On our Lido STEs, we earn X DOT or X Kusama on our chain, and then help them achieve liquidity while getting toward Polkadot staking. So.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think like Substrate framework, this modularity really enables a lot of things. For us, I think we are finishing our a private payment fungible token layer, which is guarding your essential privacy using ZK Snark. Of course, this is the most exciting ones. And we have 2 ongoing. First is that private NFT, right, which is kind of it's a ERC 721 analogous, but it's private and guarding ZK Snark. And what's in the further pipeline is actually private EVM patent. You're going to have support Solidity programmable private asset. Yeah. So these are the patents we're super excited. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of what we do by virtue of trying to bring blockchain to the real world is pretty boring and like stuff that was done on blockchain years ago. But the cool thing that I think we did was our on-chain crowd loan reward claiming palette, which relies on using Substrate's unsigned transactions, and then inside of that we do our own signature validation to show that you're claiming these tokens from the address that you contributed to the crowd loan from. And we're able to do that because Substrate is super flexible about transactions.
That's really cool, yeah.
So we're still protected against any sort of DDoS for having open unsigned transactions, but our users can claim their rewards without having to have any of our tokens to pay fees or things like that.
So that's really interesting to me because you're mentioning something that as a developer working with Substrate, you have a lot of flexibility, right? So sure, you have flexibility with composing your runtime with all these different palettes, and each palette is doing something very specific. And you can reuse palettes. You can use existing palettes. But the thing that you mentioned, where we're able to modify the way that a transaction is basically constructed to meet some requirements or specifications. Can you talk a little bit more about not necessarily how it works, because it's kind of a little abstract, complex, but I mean, in a nutshell, it's just the way that the payload is signed, right?
Yeah, so...
But and other things where you can kind of play around with your flexibility of Substrate when you're writing palettes.
Right, so the default way that Substrate validates that a transaction is allowed is to say that it's signed by your key in your wallet, and that you have enough balance to pay the fee for that transaction on that account that signature comes from. And that's the default way that almost every blockchain validates transactions. In Substrate, as a developer, for any given extrinsic, any given call, you can change that validation function. You can add additional restrictions, or you can loosen those restrictions. A good example of this in default parachain configuration is once a runtime upgrade has been approved, anyone can submit the runtime blob without having to pay the huge fee for all the bytes in that transaction. That transaction is free because it's a common good for the chain to enact the upgrade, right?
Right. Super interesting. And so the other thing that this makes me think of, and I want to ask you guys about while we're here, is what would you recommend for someone that wants to start building a palette? Where do they start, right? Obviously, it's very flexible. You can just encapsulate the logic that you want for your runtime. But what are do's and don'ts, and what's your kind of best practices recommendation? I don't know who wants to go first.
I guess I could go first.
Yes.
Yeah, one thing I would say, the architecture of how Palette works is very similar to how smart contracts work. You can imagine Palettes as just being like an embedded smart contract of the blockchain itself. So in terms of developing your own palette, actually making a smart contract would be a pretty good start. Like if you have like very specific business logic, like a specific idea that you want to create, for example, you want to create DeFi, you can start out a smart contract, see how it works. The only problem with smart contract is that the gas prices are unpredictable, and I guess the other thing is that it's quite limited when in terms of like what the palette or the application can access within the native chain. So when you see those limitations, then you understand why you have to use a palette. And I'd say that's like a pretty good starting point.
Yeah, I think I can share a little bit. Like just said, right? So it's great to think about the smart contract, but the way you can really think about that is that you can start thinking from the data, right? The first thing to think about is like what kind of data you want to keep on chain, and also be aware that any piece of data you can store it on chain is kind of expensive, right? Because this is a storage cost, and every value you can validate that. And the second is the kind of like a logic, right? Like which kind of data processing logic, which is kind of like the business logic part of the smart contract, you want to build, right? And the third is interface, right? What is kind of like a function calls? What is APIs you want to put into the palette? And if you can kind of like these three kind of things together, and you pretty much have a good idea like how to build a palette, then actually the Substrate palette system has dedicated kind of like a framework for each of this kind, right? First, you have storage declaration, and you have like extrinsic interfaces, and there's a business logic you just write in the Rust code. Yeah.
I think maybe also we can, I guess, so the question is asking like what are something that developer can build right at the beginning as building a palette?
How would you recommend someone
How would
approaching
you
building a palette? Like, what's the starting point?
Yeah, I think just as a starting point, I guess like working on something that you are personally interested in problems that you think exist in the blockchain space or in the Polkadot space. No one has solved it before. And then I guess if that really is the thing that you like it, try to implement a MVP for that and go from here. I think building Substrate is not. It's not that easy, right? It's a lot of things to go. So your passion has to be so large to overcome all of the challenges, going forward as a new developer.
Okay, so I'm going to pass the mic around and ask one question to close this section, right? If you had all the time in the world, what palette would you implement? What would be your favorite palette by yourself?
It's a good question. I need to think about that a second. Does anyone else have anything jumping out at them?
Sure. Well, I guess for me it's quite easy. So one of the things that our team is working on right now is called XVM, which is short for Cross Virtual Machine. The idea here is that we want smart contract environments to be interoperable with each other. Right now through Substrate, we have interoperable blockchain. But still, smart contracts themselves are not that interoperable. Let's say you have an EVM chain and you have an ink or contract palette chain, but how can you call transactions from one another? Like if I deploy an ink contract, can I call a Substrate contract from it? And right now it's impossible to, not impossible, it's like really, really difficult to do that. So we want to create a palette where it sort of creates a generic interface between any smart contract, since the underlying architecture are quite similar for it to be compatible with each other. And we want to really expand this further. And I guess if as a question, like if I had all the time in the world to make it, then I would love to add all the smart contract capability into the single palette, just to make it plug and playable.
If I have all of the time, well, I need to think about like the company's mission. From day one, we want to bring 1 billion people to Web3, to DeFi. So I think scalability is still missing. Even though parachain is a sharded blockchain inside the Polkadot space, right? Ecosystem, but the the block time is still limited. So if I had all of the time, I would think about some type of rollup system on top of a parachain. Let's say it's zero knowledge ZK rollup. It's not private, just ZK rollup. And then the users are able to roll up hundreds of thousands of millions of transactions into one single batch. And then the sequencer take those transactions, batch them, generate the proof, send to the parachain. Parachain, we have a palette right here that verify this specific proofs. If it's yes, then we do the state, Merkle tree state updates, and then make the, I guess, billion people happy because they want instant finality, right? They want their transaction, or they want their action to be done sub-seconds, right? And so if we actually have 10 billion people to use, actually no, sorry, 5 billion people to use, then we might need another layers of network, let's say layer 3 on top of the layer 2. So that's, I think that could be super interesting to work on.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, that's great. A lot of people sharing. We should first grow the Earth's population to 10 billion first, and then 10 billion. Maybe we'll have more like AI agents using blockchain rather than rather than humans. Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, I think one thing I'm particularly interested in is actually stateless blockchain design, right? So the idea here is that you don't have to store every data on chain. You're just using some cryptographic primitives, for example, like accumulators, could be zero knowledge, could be not zero knowledge. So this, I think this will bring huge benefit. The core idea here is that you want to separate consensus and data availability, and you will bring like more light client, right? In the spirit of democratize the blockchain to more applications, not only like people with a beefy computer, but also with cell phone, with all the IoT devices. I think this is, if I have all the time, I will do that. Yeah.
Super cool. Oh, Greg got his question.
Having to think that the company had on what they would want to say. So I think the coolest thing I'd like to work on is like Taproot integrations. A lot of cool stuff on Bitcoin Taproot, and that would obviously affect our users. Additionally, I think there's like a lot of cool Bitcoin forks that we would love to integrate if we had time. So Bitcoin Cash, Doge, and bring in Polkadot would be pretty cool.
That's so cool.
So yeah, that's it.
I like Polkadot. That's a great, great name.
Great name.
I can picture the car already having those. Did you guys see that car outside the Doge car? Yeah, the Doge car. Polkadot car.
I think the thing that I'd like to work on is a BPF palette. The BPF is a packet filtering language. So it's designed so that you can prove that it halts, prove that it only accesses certain memory addresses, things like that. It's used in routers and in the Linux kernel. And it's designed to be a virtual machine language that can be run in kernel space securely. Bringing that to the blockchain makes it possible for you to write sort of little places in your palettes where users can hook in snippets of their own code, and you can prove things about those snippets and know that they're like safe to execute without having to do a full runtime upgrade and without having to have the complexity of like a full EVM and programmable smart contract environment.
How much time do you think that'll take? How
Too much time.
Too much.
Alright, so for me, it would be to help expand on our current VAT contracts palette. So our current VAT contracts right now is extending the Ink smart contract with some extra capabilities of HTTP requests and then the confidentiality of executing off-chain, like in our off-chain secure enclave workers. So one of the cool things that I think that that we have like proposed is I believe it's just having like a side VM that is able to keep a connection and listen in on any incoming connections or any incoming requests, so that you can have some like interesting use cases there and really just like you can just have your wildest imaginations with it and give a lot of customability to the developers.
I will add to that Fal has a really interesting architecture where they basically have like this sidechain running with it's like a stripped out runtime, right? And I recommend those of you interested here to go and check out the Fat Contracts workshop, because what they're doing is very unique in how they're using Substrate and extending it. So this kind of like concludes like, you know, this second last part. Is there any questions from the audience? I'm sure there is some. We talked about like palettes, we talked about Rust, we talked about you know, what these guys are excited about, what these guys you know, think is lacking. Okay, Jake has a question. Amazing.
Yeah, when you were talking about code that could be executed in an environment like a virtual environment in kernel space or something like that, one of the things that I was kind of thinking about is, so with runtime development, we do benchmarking and linear regression and find what weights we associate with certain calls and certain functionality. But with smart contracts, if you're not using a gas counter, how do you kind of enforce how a user, because anybody can deploy any sort of arbitrary contract, how do you prevent like denial of service kind of attacks or complexity kinds of things? And does that relate to what you're describing?
Yeah, so this is why I think BPF would be cool to have on the blockchain specifically.
BPF?
BPF. Berkeley Packet Filter is the expansion of the algorithm, but it's now implemented in Linux and a bunch of other Unixes. The reason is that bytecode, that VM language is extremely simple. It doesn't allow complex loops, it provably halts, so you can look at the block of code and like analyze it and know its weight, like provably. It is not Turing complete, so it's only good for plugging in specific computations. But you know, if you want to have, you know, in our case for Centrifuge, we want to be able to have, customers potentially have different loan payback structures, write-off rules, things like that, and being able to plug those in as simple algorithms that we know halt, that we know have a fixed cost to compute is valuable to us.
Sweet, thank you. And another question, I guess, about WASM. I assume WASM contracts are Turing complete. Do WASM contracts, or at least with Ink, use some sort of gas counter, or is that still a problem with users deploying arbitrary, potentially really complex contracts? How do you handle that?
Any Ink experts in the panel?
Well, not Ink expert, but I could give it a shot. Okay, so first, when it comes to contract complexity, of course they have gas. So that's why you can't really execute anything that's too complex. Another thing with Ink that's interesting is that they have a concept of tombstoning, where if you don't have enough deposit in your contract, after a certain point, it wouldn't really execute. So it'll just be there. That's a way of the contract helps a way of sort of filtering out unnecessary bloat in the network.
Cool, thank you both.
Actually, to add to that, I have a friend who works at Compilers, and he talked to me at length about some of this stuff, and I'm going to struggle to remember exactly what the issue was called. But there is sort of, I want to say state explosion with sorry? No, there's sort of, with gas metering in WASM, there's a certain issue where you can basically, I think, DDoS some contracts. And that was an issue, I think, for a while. I don't know if that's been solved, but yeah, just want to mention it.
Cool.
Thank you.
Do you guys want to add anything? Any questions other questions from the audience or questions from Crowdcast? Jake gets a rose.
I think somebody asked a question here, gets a rose.
Nice.
Do we have those NFTs also? No? Maybe?
NFT rose.
Never mind.
So if I'm gonna write my first Rust, open my first Rust repository, what are some of the best coding practices? If you come from other languages, you will think about static code analysis and how to package the software and how to deliver it. So what are some good practices for Rust? If you're just starting, what is the minimum amount of tooling for your code base?
Yeah, I can take care. First, go to the Rust website. There is a Rust book. It's awesome. Just follow the examples. It should be getting started in 10 minutes. Actually, I will ask you, can you share your background a little bit? Like which kind of programming language you have used before?
Python, Go, JavaScript?
Right, cool. I think Rust is a little bit more like functional, right? So it's like, if you have tried like Haskell, like OCaml, it will be a little bit easier to understand the type system. But I think JavaScript is kind of functional. I mean, people may may have different opinions, but I think just get started. I think the most important thing is to get started, rather than like how to get started. That's my view. Yeah.
I think you will get more and more excited the more you're getting started.
Thank you.
I want to add, run Clippy constantly. Clippy is Rust's linter, and it will tell you about a whole bunch of common patterns where new users might write things, as they would in C or Python or JavaScript, where there may be, a one-liner in Rust that does the right thing. And it will also tell you sometimes if you're using one-liners that are too clever and are hard to read. It's a great tool.
Also to add, like, working with Rust, you can do everything in Rust. So to draw a comparison to Ethereum, if you're building a Solidity contract, you're going to build in Solidity, you're going to test in JavaScript, TypeScript, you're going to have a node running. It's quite complex setup to like get running, but with Rust and Substrate, you just need the Rust compiler and Clippy or your other tools, and you're good to go.
Cool. Okay, sweet. So for this kind of final part of the panel, and I know it feels like it's been long already, but we have time, and this is sort of a unique opportunity to see you guys in person and be here. So I wanted to talk about community. So the thing with community in the specific realm which we're in as developers, we're not talking about sort of our users, we're talking about the developer community. So I'm curious in hearing, what are the things that, all these, like we're talking about using palettes from such and such library and writing something here, and then maybe, collaborating with Remark, right? And BitCountry, and I know that you guys also are doing a lot of collaborations with other parachain teams. So my question is, how do you see that grow the developer community? And for a developer coming in, what does it look like for them? Are they working for Astar and then that's it, or are they kind of like doing a lot of different tasks? And how does that culture really look like?
Okay, yes, we did collaborate with a lot of teams, and we still do a lot. For example, we collaborate with Super Colony to sort of finalize the ink contract development side. We also collaborate with Parallel too for the Polkadot crowd loan. And for I guess developers coming into Star Network, collaboration. I guess our approach to collaboration is mostly extending our ecosystem so that it makes the developer experience much more easier. So they have more tools, have more ways to just work on top of the Star Network. So yeah, for community members, they don't really have to think too much about like, they don't really have to learn too much about like what's going on with other projects, or if they want to make on a Star Network, do they have to learn to use other networks or something like that. For us, we try to keep it simple as possible.
So I know you guys use a lot of Patrax tools, right?
Sorry?
Patrax Labs. And also Ink by virtue. So how does that relationship look like? You're using tools, you're relying on these tools, like you could build your own, but they already exist, and like how does that, like, from the perspective of like, how do you see it grow and where it's at today?
Well, right now, it's not really anywhere at the moment because we don't have, our live nets don't really have contract palettes yet due to the issue with the contract palette and with production parachains. So we can't really do that. It's only available on the local testnet at the moment. But for developers coming in, yeah, contract lab, or if they're using other different tools, we just link their tools in our official documentation. I mean, I'll admit our docs aren't the best out there, so it's obvious. Bit messy. Yeah, we do that, and then our partners will also add our network as in their documentation to test out these tools, see it in action, and so it's like sort of that's how the relationship goes.
Anyone else that kind of wanted to touch on how they're also collaborating with other parachain teams and their developer communities?
Yeah, something that's really interesting about collaboration is you get to kind of dive into some of the experts of another project, and they'll lead you to some different documentation of exactly what they want to build. So being able to have different perspectives looking in, I think it creates all these unique palettes in general, and you get also the guidance of these very experienced developers. And like for someone like me that's like pretty new to the ecosystem, it's very helpful to understand if what I'm doing during my open, my draft PR of, oh, where am I going wrong as I'm committing code, and they tell you, oh, this is the best practice. I think that's like very important, and especially for onboarding different developers, having them have open feedback as they like move along the process.
And so how would you go about like seeking that mentorship?
For me, it took a lot of just messaging people and trying to make friends and network. I just was really interested in trying to get into the ecosystem, though I didn't have like the best experience, but I just never stopped, and I just really wanted it. It's hard to get people to think like that, but I don't know how to do it.
This is something that teams really need to prioritize and think about if they want to make it work, right? You have to, it's not just about saying, sure, if someone opens an issue or a pull request, we'll respond, we'll help them out. It's also about, having more development conversations in, public Discord channels so people can see who the developers are, can see who to ask questions from. And that can be a challenge in our space because inevitably someone will pop up and say, when Binance? But trying to find that balance and being more transparent, more open, more available to your community can be really worthwhile, but definitely takes effort and takes focus.
Yeah, I think that's I just want to add, right? So I think we are always happy to work with other parachain teams in the sense that our value proposition is bring value to all the parachain assets. So for example, if other parachain plus us, then you can privatize your asset, right? We already, in last year, we did kind of the first XDM messaging trial with Akala, and we're trying to do the same thing with Moonbeam, and perhaps like many more teams sit here, right? So I think we're always happy to help. And second, I think when we first start Manta, right, we want to build a kind of like open source culture in the sense that especially accept all the dev of code, right? So every piece of code is open source and GPL licensed. And we are also encourage our kind of like our own developers and cryptographers contribute to more broader scopes open source project. For example, we are contributing to a pretty cool a zero knowledge proof system called ZK Garage, right? So I think this is I think it's like if you are not collaborating, you don't like open source, it seems to be the wrong space to be sitting in actually. Yeah.
I think for us, we are in a sense that are a little bit different because we are very application specific focused. So I would say that in the short term, we work with developer, and more often we just convert them part-time, full-time. So that's kind of the way that we're working at. But in the long term, once the platform has tremendous use case, asset, and sort of activities, transaction volume, it could be attractive enough for other developer to come. And at that time, we thought about the sort of the concept between being a little more control over who can be developed on top, who can deploy the application to customer, versus everyone can deploy. The quality is, it could be varied. So we might take the first approach a little more. It's a spectrum. And the way that we think about that is to give them both sort of really good community support, developer support, plus very good economic incentive by incentivizing them through their own sort of intrinsic value to help them achieve what they want to achieve. And then from my personal experience building on multiple blockchains, I think that direct communication with developer and mentor them it's critical. Developers want to feel like they are being heard, their problems being helped, and I think the response time and then really just the efforts that you put on the community is really the key to success of building this community, developer community.
Yeah, awesome. And so to kind of wrap up on this question, like, how do you find developers? You get half of us are founders here. How do you find developers? Is there a strategy? Are you in the Discord channels?
So finding developers as people who's working for the team?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I guess. I mean, there's a lot of job openings. AngelList was it? Do you have job openings? Also, introduction from friends, fellow employees who would bring their programming friends to our team. And also, I guess another thing is just we try to be open as possible. So it's not like we find the developers, and we do, but it's why we also want the developers to find us. And that's why, as a hub of Polkadot, we want developers to really build for it. And when they start building on top of the Star Network, they're also open to building the core of the Star Network as well.
Yeah, for us, I think finding developer is the hardest problem, and then is one of the most critical problems to solve. And I think that developers, especially the one that we think are 10x engineers or 10x developer, A players, they more or less surrounded by other A players. So in our team, I think we highly encourage every single team members to refer their talented friends who join us. So far, it's been very effective. We started the company with maybe 3-5 people-ish 10 months ago, and now we have 60 people. And then I do statistics on those numbers of people. Actually, a pretty significant portion of the team members and developers are referred from other existing members, and they had amazing word of mouth, and then they keep on pushing new talents in this space. So I think that is I find the most effective way to find. It's about the quality, 100%. So
at Interlay, we're pretty academic based. Our founders continue to study at Imperial College. So we've actually found a fair number of very fairly gifted students who've joined our ranks. That's what I want to add. We university students, and if you keep working, build up your skills, you'll be headhunted, I'm sure.
Yeah. Also, I think everyone has a great thought. I think something I want to share is that I think being able to find good developers, I think you have to do something interesting, right? So I think people are driven by, some people are driven by more kind of economic incentives. And also some people are driven by, if you're really doing cool tech or a cool application, and people think what they're doing will really kind of change the world to a better place, right? So you will also get this kind of attraction. And for us, I think for our team members, actually many members are getting attracted because we're working on a cool tech problem, applying zero-knowledge proofs into the blockchain space, right? So I think that has been successful so far as well.
I want to tie this back to the previous question, actually, and say, if you want to find developers who are going to help you build a community of contributors outside your team, and we're going to be able to support those people, then look for places where developers are already supporting people. Look at, Rust has several great communities where you're going to find really knowledgeable developers who find value in supporting other people and helping them learn, and those people can really help you better build your community approach and your interaction with other teams.
Yeah, to add to that, I think there's been a big presence of public goods at this East Denver, and I think that's really important point to drive home. The whole public goods system is incredibly important to Web3 and DWeb. I think Polkadot does quite a good job with its treasury and funding individuals, teams, and doing cool work. Interlay, we're kind of trying to take that methodology as well and also apply it. So if you're a developer looking to get into the space, like I think I think there was a message from Gavin Wood recently. There's like a whole fund of like money. Like just apply to it. If you have an interesting idea, the worst case, like the proposal will just go unnoticed. In the best case, you'll get a lot of money to like work on something you find interesting.
Yeah, super cool. So to kind of like slowly wrap up here, I want to ask why. Well, so for the teams who deliberately decided to spin off their Substrate initial node from a hackathon project or whatever it was into now a parachain. Why did you choose that, and what was the journey? And within sort of answering what was the journey, would you recommend? What were your pain points? I want to just hear. And that might apply to developers working on the palettes and on the runtime module too.
I can start because we have a live Substrate chain that we're going to be migrating to a parachain. I think the value proposition of becoming a parachain is so high that there's almost no reason not to. The built-in interoperability of Polkadot, the cross-consensus messaging, saves so much complexity on bridges and anything else that having access to that full like DeFi ecosystem of Polkadot is a no-brainer to me. Challenges, I mean, we have a multi-page document on our migration process. Part of the reason that we chose to have a chain on Kusama was so that we could test that migration process. We did that much more slowly than we're going to want to do for the full cutover. Make sure that we kind of understood each step as we go. We're going to try to do it like 100 times faster this time. But it's complicated. There's a lot of data to migrate. There's a lot of challenges there.
I think just want to add a little bit the challenging part. I think Substrate is such a great developer framework. You're getting some prototype running is relatively easy. But the real hard part is from the prototype to actual production. You need to care about security, and you want to kind of like squeeze the last little bit of the performance out of it, and also you want to do like a secure audit, all this kind of stuff, right? I think it's just like I don't think there's a single challenge, but actually I think the devils are in the details. Yeah.
So if I understood your question correctly, so you're talking about the pain points that we had, or basically the journey that we had from conception of our network until we became parachain.
First question, why parachain?
Why parachain?
Second, yeah.
Okay, so first question, why parachain? Of course, being a parachain means that we're able to deliver the shared consensus that the relay chain offers, which is absolutely huge, especially for us, where that staking relies on the fact that we don't have to incentivize the validators. And the only way we can actually make that happen is by not having validators. So you can only do that as a parachain, really. Because instead of validators, we have collators, who basically collates all the nodes. It's like a full archive node, say, that then sends the information to the relay chain. And relay chain is the one that, or at least the Polkadot and Kusama validators are the one who actually validates all those transactions, and then be part of the relay chain. That's why we're able to create this DApp staking mechanism, where people are able to stake their tokens to a smart contract and then receive rewards based on that, block rewards. Yeah, so that's like the reason why we kind of have to do parachain. If we did, there's no way we can make that. But so how we started? Starting at where I'd say our team is one of the earlier ones when it comes to the Polkadot ecosystem, since we've been here for, I think, like more than 3 years from what I understand. Yeah, more than 3 years. At the time we were called Manta Network, where we focused on bringing layer 2 solutions to the Polkadot ecosystem. We want to be like the plasma node for Polkadot, and that's why we're called like that. But it was still for the developers and for smart contracts. And so yeah, that was the initial start. Now the problem is this industry is really evolving fast. Everything's so fast moving. Just trying to keep up with Parity is like a full-time job. And you do have a full-time engineer whose job is just to keep up with Parity. So it's very difficult. And as I said, like having complex documentations into like migrating storage and trying to run a runtime upgrade. So many things involved in it, and trying to understand new things. I think like even with recent Polkadot, like 0.9.16, they introduced a new version scheme, I believe. That's like trying to wrap my head around that is also a challenge. But all of those are pain points. Like it's something that a lot of other blockchains don't really. I'm not really too sure about how other non-Substrate blockchains handle it, but I would assume that it's not as challenging as how it is with Substrate when we have, especially as a parachain, where we have to ensure that our parachain node has the same version as the relay chain node. If not, then the block production won't happen at all. So it's always this aspect of maintaining things, catching up, and also trying to understand what other people are doing so that we can stay unique and we can provide the value that people can actually use, provide value that actually does create something for the Polkadot network and for the future of Web 3.0, not just as another blockchain project that's like an Ethereum derivative.
Well, for us, the biggest challenge is to buy a really good computer, like really expensive computer, because compile Rust Substrate program just takes so much time, and then all of the team members ask me, Yubo, I want this computer. And then we'll do that. So I think the biggest challenge would be sort of this, connections between all of the parachains. I think that a good example here is that each parachain looks like a small island. You do get shared security benefits, but you're your own single chain, like single player games. But when you build more connections with other parachains through the XAM channel, the value increase toward each of the parachain, and then the Polkadot network as a whole increase value exponentially, which increase the numbers of users and increase the value of the dot, and also increase, like the actual use cases of the parachain. So what I think the challenge collectively for the whole community would be to build more channels, to actively work with each other, and then to compose more functions, and then try to, make it really interoperable, like truly interoperable. We're not here to play a single player game. Everyone here to play a collective game. And then that's part of the reason we become a parachain, right, to answer the question, is to connect. Second is to share security. We do not want to run our own validators, right? That's one of the big premises, where winning the auction, getting the crowd, we'll share the security with the Polkadot, which has tens of 20s of millions of stake, right, on the network, which helps a lot to bootstrap the security of the basic parachain. So that would be my opinions on that.
Yeah, I have a very similar point. Like we started out with Web3 Foundation grant. They let us build our prototype, and the essence there was just to capture the market of Bitcoin and bring that value into Polkadot. And that's why we wanted to become a parachain, so we could fully bring as much liquidity in as possible that would truly benefit the system and enable other parachains to also use the wrapped assets in their protocols too. To go there off track, I guess, in our journey, we were originally going to be a common good parachain. So it's always been, since the get-go, we were always going to be a parachain. We became a fully fledged parachain instead with a token model and governance to be more sustainable. But we're really happy, the journey we've come so far, and I think that, the value we bring, we hope will, really increase the value of Polkadot as a whole.
Yeah, one thing to add on, I think it would be super interesting to add on an incentive mechanism from Parity Web 3, which is to use some of the treasury, use some of the reserved dots, kusama, to actually incentivize people to build connection. I think the more connection we build, the more valuable the network as a whole going to be. So it's a valuable investment.
Yeah, definitely. Polkadot as a blockchain provides shared security, so it's attractive for some standalone chain to not need to worry about all this network infrastructure and these validators. It's a lot, right? We're not talking about just kind of creating an application like on Ethereum or on some existing blockchain. We're talking about creating a blockchain, right? So definitely, and then there's also what you're talking about, which is like, we then have an opportunity to connect with people. Like it's this community thing. This is kind of like ties back into what we were talking about with like the developer community, like what we're building. We're building like pretty much like the same planet, right? Different islands, right? And the more connections between those islands, the cooler it is. So I liked all of your answers, and I was honestly curious because you guys have been here for a while. Like you guys have been here probably like the most earliest cohorts of parachain builders. So I think we're super privileged to like hear from you guys. And with that being said, I mean this is the end officially of my questions. I'm going to bring it to the audience. If there's any questions from the audience, we've talked about a lot of things, and I think that you guys are lucky to be able to ask any question you'd like right now. So please don't be shy.
Hi, if as an enterprise we are making a buy decision, if you may, on going with a certain platform, how would you pitch Substrate?
So I can think about that as a way that you fully control the chain versus having a blockchain that you couldn't control the details of how the blockchain actually works. You also fully control the economics of the blockchain you build. You can incentivize any type of tokens as the gas fee. You can incentivize any type of behaviors on your chain. You can also sort of build into this the required speed that you want. You can also sort of trade off in between this trinomial between decentralizations and scalability and all this stuff. And I think that it's basically equals to, do you want to use a as an enterprise, do you want to use a standard that's do you want to go to this way, right? Do you want to go to a city full of people, right? And then you are a shop right there and say, hey, I have some solution and I want to sell to my customer. Versus, do you want to build a whole city right there, so the customer can come and then say, hey, this is the Disneyland. I have everything I want, and that you can do whatever you want. And then, but at the same time, you do not have to run validators. You do not have to run a lot of infrastructures where that requires you to build a whole blockchain yourself. So I would say that's the way that I would think about that and how to pitch to enterprise.
I guess I can also add on to what you said as well. I agree with that answer. And also, one, advantage of Substrate nowadays, if you were to build it as an enterprise solution, is that unlike other frameworks or other derivatives, when you're building on substrates, you're never alone, I would say. There's always a community behind it. There's always a lot of libraries. A lot of modules are pre-made. If you go to the Substrate repository, there's like a bunch of libraries, palettes there you can use. There's also the ORML, the open runtime module library. Those are very useful too. And as a developer, you can really quickly cook up a prototype, see how it works right away. And it's also easy to attract new developers who can really specialize on that. And I would see, like, in a couple of years from now, I could definitely see a future where we have a dedicated developer just for Substrate and have a whole, accredited program for developing a Substrate. And maybe I would go far as to say, like, Substrate would be the sort of a .NET framework for blockchains.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer.
Hey, thank you guys for bringing this together. I'm actually part of the second cohort of Substrate Academy, so I've been into the Dotcom ecosystem for quite a while. But I'd love to hear your comments on one question that I always get, and it's on composability, right? I think in the concept of Ethereum, everyone talks about like instant composability, and some of the feedback or thoughts I get from people are like, how does this work in the Dotcom ecosystem when you have different parachain, being domain specific? So I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
In some ways it's the same, it's just harder. Cross-consensus messaging is really, really powerful. It allows you not just to transfer tokens back and forth between different chains, but also to invoke any extrinsic or call on those other chains, as long as those are allowed by the security rules of that chain. So it takes a little more, I think, coordination between teams, but you can absolutely build things so that you can have a call on your chain that'll do a cross-consensus message to another chain, transfer some tokens, invoke an extrinsic there, then that'll send a result back to your chain, which will trigger further asynchronous actions. The asynchronicity is hard, and I think the callbacks and results handling is still a work in progress, but the flexibility and the power is all there to be fully composable across Polkadot parachains.
Substrate generics.
Yeah, I just want to add a little bit to what Brandon just said, right? So I think, at least for me, right, the mental model of thinking about XCM is kind of like I think it's really powerful. I think we do, like everyone kind of agree that XCM is actually still an early stage. It has some of the features complete, but there are definitely more things to come. So I think it's the right time to get on board right now. And as XCM getting more developed, and you will be kind of like the rare expert, valuable expert in XCM, so a lot of new hot projects want to hire you, right? So that's definitely a great position to be. I think there is actually a more interesting composability problem, is that how does a substrate-based chain compose with other chains? I think I'm pretty excited that I think more people should thinking along this direction as well, right? So can you actually leverage XCM to talk to other chains to actually bring broader composability to the ecosystem?
I think that the composability on Substrate is it's a little bit guarded compared with Ethereum. So a smart contract platform, any transactions from VOA can modify the world states that shared across every single smart contract applications. It is you have these flexibilities as long as the code can execute, right? On the Polkadot side, I would say that it's relatively speaking, it's possible. Eventually, it's more possible. Then when you try to compose across, first of all, if you're talking about composability within a parachain, it's not a big problem. Very similar to this sort of world state that you can modify. In fact, all the palette can modify the states. When you cross different parachains, there are some sort of guards in between. If you want to open the channel, if you want to enable certain transaction to happen, if you want to enable certain asset to be used as reserve to transfer or not, that's purely determined by this specific chance. So I think it's harder, but I think it's possible. And what's going to be cool in the long term will be any transactions on one parachain can request another function call on an arbitrary second parachain, and that can be, it's better to be deterministically executed and then return back. But I think that will be the long-term vision of what Polkadot is trying to do.
Yeah, cool, thanks a lot. I mean, definitely relatively very early stages for Polkadot, right? Really, if you think about it. Polkadot launched in 2020, and all of these cool technologies are still being developed, and things are growing fast, right? And I think it's cool that we can have teams like you guys are already standing up on your own 2 feet, right? So, is there any more questions from the audience? Questions? Yay.
Yeah, so with the trend of winning parachain auctions, the cost of it going way down, I've heard of some teams just planning to fully self-fund it themselves. So I'm wondering how kind of bootstrapping users works in that case, and maybe something like airdrops for different protocols or different chains. And then also with that, have you heard any updates on Parrot threads moving forward?
Maybe I could quickly answer the crowd loan, because Parallel Finance, we are one of the biggest providers for crowd loan. So you can better incentive DAO holders to use Parallel platform to raise the crowd loan, because the contributors or the DAO holders have liquidity, have better rewards because we are also dropping rewards, and then have better yield once they compose with our DeFi ecosystem. The second pillar that I think is going to be interesting is that the money market that we design specifically can facilitate with this type of borrow capital for crowdloan. So what we are trying to provide is that you need to provide a collateral, under collateral, because you only need to over collateralize the interest payments for 96 weeks. Once you pay that 96 weeks of interest payments, you borrow the capital from our money markets to support your own crowdloan. And then so the cost is effectively decreased by a factor of whatever the interest rate is out there, right? If it's 10% per year, then you effectively decrease by significant amounts. And then also, what you can also do is that reach out to existing crowdloan contributors onto our platform. Each contributors to any of the parachains receive crowdloan dot called C.1, C.2, depending on different batches. Those people can become your parachain contributors because they can use their C dot as a valuable collateral in our system to borrow additional dots to support a crowdloan. And then, so I think that would be super interesting.
Okay, one more question. Yeah, so you guys talked about having developers and kind of the process of that, but I was curious, how much blockchain experience are you looking for in a developer, or do you rather just more general developer experience and maybe some blockchain experience?
I guess I could answer that question. So for our company, it's I guess two main factors when it comes to hiring, or I guess determining a good engineer. One is how much programming background they have, not exclusive to blockchain, but just a general program background. And the other thing is how fast of a learner is that person. Because blockchain itself, it's really difficult to expect people to have a lot of experience in the blockchain space, especially when the blockchain architecture itself is changing. Like imagine if one of the job requirements is like 5 years in Substrate, like, it doesn't make sense, right? So Substrate itself has only been a thing for a couple of years, and when it comes to like modern architecture and the information that's out there, it's less than a year, I would say, since those documentations were available. So it's not really about having a lot of knowledge in the blockchain space. If, for example, if the person is like developed for counterparty or something, or having smart contracts on top of Bitcoin, like that's very novel, that's crazy, yeah, but I'm not sure that knowledge would translate well into Substrate in the traditional sense. So we highly value how fast that person could learn and pick up new concepts and just the basic underlying knowledge of programming.
Thanks. Yes, same here. We require like a 20 years blockchain experience and a 10 years Substrate experience. Yes, I think joking aside, I think I think from our own experience, like understanding distributed systems and how does computer works, how the computer system works in general helps a lot. And secondly, I think because we are like all Rust dev, at least familiar with the Rust programming language is very important. I just want to bring this third point here, right? You have, we were like, just from our own experience, we would love to hire someone who are like passionate to work in the space, right? So for example, if you want to work for, no offense to IBM, right? So just like, if you really enjoy working for IBM, probably not the kind of guy we want to hire. Yeah, fair point.
Well, thanks so much. Thank you so much, everyone in the audience, for having come out for this panel. It was super fun for me to meet these guys and chat about Substrate and Rust and things that you can do with it, and things that they've done with it. So with that being said, I wanted to give a final announcement that we are going to migrate to the workshop happening at 1 o'clock from here. So we'll kind of be like cleaning up, and I encourage all of you to come to our workshop. So Sean and I are going to be giving a 2-hour session on how to build a palette. We talked about palettes, we talked about Substrate, we talked about how to launch your blockchain, and we're going to be doing exactly that in the workshop. So you will be learning all sorts of things. I recommend, especially developers who maybe are not very Rust familiar or Substrate familiar, but for that matter, but are interested in participating in building something for Denver. So on that note, Polkadot has a bounty to build a parachain for Denver. So I encourage you devs that are curious to come to our workshop and think about that if that's what you want to do. Thank you so much for the event organizers here, and Dan and Caroline and Jason for the stream. I hope that this was fun for everyone as it was for me.
I think it was a real pleasure. I think we have a few more announcements in the context of Denver in particular, so I wanted to bring Urban on up. So yes, the workshop is happening, which is awesome. And we wanted to give you guys a little bit more of a sense of, we're here in Denver together, so thank you all for traveling out. Like, this is amazing. I'm personally, I've been doing stuff in Denver for a long time, and I think this is the biggest and best year, mostly because of the things we get to do with Substrate together. So yes, the workshop will be a great way to leverage, if you're here in person in Denver watching us, there's a large prize pool. I think that we can talk a little bit about with Urban here. But there's also a virtual hackathon that's going on beyond this. This will last for about a month, and there's even more prizes, right? And the objective here is to take some of these knowledge that you'll get a little bit later today and go on and do great things. So we'll continue to engage with you guys virtually on this big hackathon all throughout the month. And I would encourage you guys to watch this live stream of the workshop that'll be on YouTube here shortly after this, as well as all these other events, and watch the live streams of what happens this Sunday. You're going to be inspired, I think, by some of the parachain projects that are coming online. So I think that's all I wanted to say, but tell us about the prizes.
Yeah, for sure, thank you. So first of all, before doing any of that, Sasha and everybody participating here, anybody in the audience, I think this was really, really good. I personally really enjoyed it. All the answers here are very inspiring, and I can assure you, both me and Sasha, Dan, and the team are going to take this into account going forward, because it is ultimately invaluable knowledge we have. So with that being said, like Dan said, we do have e-bounties, e-Denver bounties for Polkadot in general. There's kind of two portions to this. The first portion is the in-person part, right? We're here, so talk to us, do stuff in person, and the other portion is the virtual part. The in-person portion is really, yes, please go and build, right? Absolutely, but we are really more interested in your ideas. So the bounty is not to submit code per se, but really pitch us your idea. There's a bunch of submission requirements and judging criteria that you can look up. I would encourage you to look at the Polkadot Medium post describing Denver in general. There's a schedule of all our events, the bounties, all the details are there, so I'm not going to go into detail here. But I think it's a really good way to interact with us as well, right? There's a bunch of stuff that's being said, from the very detailed Substrate stuff to high-level parachain pitches and ideas and so on. So I think it's a really, really good onboarding opportunity. The second part is the virtual one, where yes, get your hands dirty, start building, come to our workshops. Sasha's going to teach you, and Sean is going to teach you how to actually build this stuff. Basically, as I understand it, from scratch to doing something very, very specific to your coding up your palettes and so on, which is essentially how you would be proceeding going forward with a substrate chain. So we do have prizes for that. There's obviously submission requirements, judging criteria, and so on. But ultimately, I think yes, it's the virtual portion. We're absolutely going to support you in all the technical channels on Discord. We've got a stack exchange now for Substrate, which is fantastic. But yeah, please take the time that we're here. Go and talk to us, pitch us your ideas, ask us any questions. We've got mentors like Alejandro there, we've got Sasha, Dan, and a bunch of other people that are here. So if you have any questions, we're absolutely happy to help, as well as parachain meetings, right? Be sure to grab some of the maybe CTO people here and discuss. But yeah, that's basically it. So I wish everybody happy hacking. Thanks for being here, and enjoy Denver. Yes.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, also thanks for organizing. That's such a great event. Thank you, Sasha, for hosting.
It was really a pleasure. It was really cool.
It was a pleasure.
I look forward to hanging out with you guys.
I'm really quick. Silence. Like, I know it's weird, but we just pause and hold for this. Can everyone just like pause for 10 seconds? And all right, cool. Okay, cool. Thank you.
So, thank you guys all for being here. Now, I want to get more into interjects. So,